military officers in charge of gun batteries whom I met were Lebanese army, yeah. But that doesn't, I mean, maybe they all disappeared 1 week later, but they were certainly there when I was there. There clearly was, yes. I wrote about it at the time in the Times, which I worked for them. Well, you're talking about an event that happened 13 years ago. I wrote at great length about it, a piece of more than 1,000 words in the Times of London, for which I was then working. If you at the end give me your name and address, because I don't use email, I'll attempt to get you a full copy of it to send it to you. It's certainly on my files in Europe and my own archives, because I have the original copy that I sent from Yerevan on that, not from Yerevan, from Beirut, on that command center, but I can promise you it existed. If you're asking me to remember now, 13 years later, the names of the people who were there, I can't remember, but there were named people in my copy that day. I was very surprised to find it. It was like a scene out of Disney World, but there it was. But welcome to Lebanon.
Yes, sir.
Maybe the problem for the left is that there's a certain Machiavellian issue here, that obviously if you want to bring down an empire, the best way to do it, over history is always been the case, draw the empire into some long, bleeding war in some place where they don't want to be. Leave this one aside. If we were in France when Napoleon seized Moscow, and the Russians burned down the city around him, and it was already September, and he had no winter quarters, and the supply lines were too long. The obvious thing for him to have done was to fix the way he structured those Houthis and stop off back to Paris, but instead he stayed there for whatever reason, and somebody in France who really wanted to break down the Napoleonic Empire who said, yes, ticket to stay there and not one step back, and so forth. And there is a dilemma here in I think, some uncertainties about many people who are really unsure about the war in Iraq, if they were free there, they'd be invading Venezuela, and so forth. And one of the aspects, I'm wondering if you could discuss this. Nobody, as far as I know, has said that the latest justification for the war, if we're going to settle the dispute between the Sunnis and the Shias, nobody has said, well, you really are going to try to settle that as going on for quite some time now before it's relative to recent events like 1066 and all that, or Charlemagne and so on. A bunch of Americans who really don't know anything at all about Islam are going to settle that. That hasn't been made a pitch to the American public, as far as I know, or to anyone else. I wondered if you could discuss a little of the dilemmas in this.
This could go on for far too long. First of all, if you were a Frenchman at the time of Napoleon, you'd probably be fighting in La Grande Armée, and you'd be with Napoleon's army in Moscow. That's the first thing to remember. There weren't a lot of leftists around at the time. No, look, I think one of the problems is that we believe, we Westerners, and particularly Americans believe, that the rest of the world wants to be like us, you. And if you go to Saudi Arabia or to Tel Aviv, you will see highways and turnpikes and road signs identical to what you'll see on the outskirts of LA or New York or wherever. And you'll see fast food restaurants, and you'll see McDonald's, and you'll see all our favorite coffee shops and Starbucks and so on. And in Beirut too, all guarded by soldiers in case they get bombed, of course, but nonetheless, there you go. And to some extent, you see, we are justified in believing this, because when I get up in my hotel in Cairo in the morning, and I open the Egyptian press, which is often full of extremely anti-American views, and then I get in my taxi and I drive past the American embassy, and there's a queue going right round the block of Egyptians wanting green cards, visas, entry, any way of getting to the United States to share in this wonderful, wealthy country which you have. And I think that to some extent, you see, we are misled by this, because there is a genuine envy of the, quote, freedoms that we enjoy among people especially who do not live in countries which have these freedoms, where the democracy is 99.98 or 99.89% or whatever. So I think in a sense, you see, we have persuaded ourselves that all these people want to be just like us. And I said last night, you know, they would like some of our democracy and our packages of human rights off our Western supermarket shelves, but they'd also like freedom from us. And this we will not understand, and this we will not give them. And I think that, you see, one of the problems is that, yes, of course, you have young American soldiers who can't speak Arabic, some of whom have never been abroad before, they come from poor backgrounds, and they're dumped in the middle of a totally alien world, alien culture, alien language, alien people, etc., etc. It doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work. Of course it doesn't. I was reading Benjamin Bush's wonderful account of being a major in a reserve marine unit in Ramadi, trying to improve life for the Sunni Muslims who were killing his men every day, trying to get generators working in prenatal clinics while avoiding mortar shells falling around or explosive devices by the road. And there's a wonderful scene which really typifies what happens when foreign armies arrive in totally alien environments. It's that this officer had been telling his men, you must be polite to Iraqis, even if you're suspicious of them. Be polite when you go in the houses. But to get into the houses, instead of giving themselves away, they always had to smash the door down and break the locks. And of course, this poor soldier's job, Benjamin Bush's job, Bush B-U-S-C-H, not B-U-S-H, his job, the major's job, was to go around repairing all the locks afterwards. And at one point, he's approached by an Iraqi who comes out very kindly and says in English, Major, can you tell me something? We know you like Iraqis, but why do you hate our doors? And I remember reading this actually this morning and thinking, that's got it right. I've heard this kind of thing so often in Iraq. Absolutely spot on. There's your problem, you see. If you actually sit down and talk to Iraqis, and one of the things this guy said was very good, he said, for security reasons we can't talk more than 5 minutes. And an Arab will be very upset if in the middle of a very serious, friendly conversation you look at your watch and say, gotta go. There's another problem. I mean, it will not work. It will not work. But, how you get this across in America, I don't know. I mean, you've got Seymour Hersh. You've got Maureen Dowd. You've got a couple of good reporters in Baghdad for the New York Times, albeit that they have to work from a stockade with armed Iraqi guards with black T-shirts and New York Times written on, which is actually how they do live in Baghdad. I don't know how you get it across that it doesn't work. The idea that we come to bestow our beneficence upon poor, benighted people who've lived a life of torture and oppression. I suppose the real thing is keeping people to the record of what happened. You see, already we believe that the myth that we don't believe it, but we believe that we wanted originally to give democracy to the Iraqi people. If you actually go back to the first initial months of the American occupation, and I was there watching it, we did not offer them democracy. We offered them committees to participate in government without occupation power. And it was only because Sistani and the Shiite clerical leadership threatened to join in the Sunni insurgency if they didn't have elections that we suddenly wanted democracy in Iraq. It was not our original intention when we entered Iraq in March and April of 2003 to have democracy. But again, the actual record of what we did has become manipulated, pushed like plasticine into something else, so that we do remember the lies about weapons of mass destruction, links between Saddam and Al-Qaeda, but the democracy thing still floats around. We never wanted democracy in Iraq when we invaded. It was later, when we were under threat, that we suddenly became converts to democracy. And now we're converts to stopping civil war, which is a mystery to the Iraqis as it is to us, because Iraqis, as I say, have never had a civil war. Why is there a threat of civil war now? Why now? Why was it that the Muslim Sunnis and the Muslim Shiites stayed together in Iraq in 8 years of fighting and dying against fellow Muslims in Iran and did not fight each other? How many thought they would? He called upon the Shiites to turn against the Sunni commanders, and they didn't do so. And they could have done. They could have done, and they didn't. So, these are all, I just throw questions back at you. There is no specific, direct, perfect, 100% reply to your question.
They play it from the other point of view, and it becomes like a baseball game. You call it the left, you call it the right, now you change teams. And is there an insurgency or is there not? I mean, isn't it the CIA or whoever they are that in every war that's what we do? They make it look like it's the other guy's team, but it's really friendly fire?
Heaven spare me if I've seen 100,000 wars. I've seen about 10.
Play a war. You're the man who's seen them all.
Yeah, but I'm not starting wars.
No, but you watch how they're played.
I feel as if you think I am starting wars.
Back in the corner.
Yes. Earlier you spoke about hope, about people of color, so-called black people, or soldiers in Iraq. I think the majority of the people of color and so-called black people are very ignorant. And
I'm going to immediately interrupt you and tell you that when I'm traveling around the States, I almost always find that members of the American black community have a very shrewd grasp of the Middle East. And not just that, but I find that they're much less intimidated in talking about the Palestinian-Israeli dispute than white Americans are. I mean, that's a fact I've noticed. And I think I can understand why.
Well, because they're just like us. They're people of color whose land was stolen from them, and they're being murdered every day. But my point is that I think the gap that was spoken about earlier between the people who know and people who don't know, or people who don't want to know, is so wide that I'm lost for hope, because I'm around my own people and I speak and I try to my best. I want to teach them.
Yeah, I often feel the same way, frankly. Yeah.
I come here just to learn more, but in actuality, no one here, I think, in my opinion, is going to go back and try to enlighten other people to wake up and say, let's get this stuff out of our.
Well, you said it.
I mean, I'm sorry, I just don't think so.
I think you may be right. I don't know. I fear so.
Because when Amy Goodman asked you a question, she interviewed you a while back, and she asked you, is there any hope? And you said, 2 seconds before, you said, no.
That's right.
You just went quiet.
Yeah, I remember it very clearly. Yeah. That was Amy Goodman, wasn't it? And it was in New Mexico, and I was in Toronto. That's right. Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Well, I'd
Sorry.
like to add to that as an educator. I mean, I talk about economic inequality, spreading disparities in wealth and income distribution, an unfair tax system, the foundations of U.S. foreign policy, which I think are imperialist, and consistently, year after year after year, the students who understand this best and get it quickest are people who were born someplace else, people who belong to American minority groups, especially African Americans, and the people who get at least the slowest and never at all are middle class and upper middle class white suburbanites. That's what I've seen.
Yep. I want to return to a couple of things that I kind of dropped initially on you, and that is, my name is Rachel Corey. I think people of conscience, not just Armenians, but anyone that is concerned about justice and fairness should insist that that play be produced in New York and bring pressure upon the New York Theater Workshop or some other organization to stage My Name is Rachel Corey, who was killed 3 days before the American attack on Iraq. So it completely disappeared in the media. There was a little column about her. This is a woman in the Solidarity Organization, the International Solidarity Movement, ISM, who was clearly wearing an orange jacket. She was identified by the Israeli military bulldozer. Not only was run over once, but the bulldozer then went back and ran over her again. That again, show off my New York Yiddish, is a shanda. That is a shame. That is something that should not be tolerated. But they can get away with it here in New York, where Israel is called the sixth borough. I'm a former New Yorker, if you couldn't tell from my accent. Now, the other thing was about the PBS Armenian genocide documentary. Now, there is a kind of upbeat story to that, and that is because of concerted pressure, not just from Armenians, because I don't think the Armenian genocide issue is an Armenian issue. I think that is a mistake, a structural mistake. It is a human rights issue. It's an issue for any human being who cares about justice. Because of pressure on PBS, practically all of the stations, I don't know the exact figure, there's something like 400 plus TV stations around the country, virtually all of them have dropped this bogus panel. So that is a victory of sorts. In terms of keeping hope alive, I can't give up. You know, I do this weekly program, Robert Wright's Dispatches. I can't speak for him, but we do hope that another world is possible. That is the theme of the World Social Forum. And if we look south of our borders and see what's happening in Bolivia and Peru and Ecuador and Venezuela, the whole continent is shaking with the possibility of another world built on not just rapacious capitalism, as Pope John called it, but on some semblance of equality and economic justice. So if we look outside, perhaps, of the United States, we can find strands and streams of hope. There's a lot happening outside our borders.
Yes, here.
I'm glad somebody not the ones that we should be concerned about. It's the Middle America who reads the mainstream quote-unquote journals who are dominated by the Israeli lobby. I'm not, probably most of you or some of you are going to hate what I'm going to say, but we're giving too much credit to either Bush or Tony Blair for coming up with this war. Israeli lobby has been working for this war for many, many years. This person of Bufo, and all other people who are around him. And I mean, they were the reason, they were the cause which pushed with them, neoconservatives and the Christians, conservatives, who have pushed into the war. We are in this war because, but nobody, it's like the elephant in the room. Everybody sees it, but nobody is able to say anything about it. I don't know what it is. You're the media. I don't know what it is about this. We mentioned once, Mr. Robert, yesterday about Israel. You mentioned today once.
I mentioned a lot of times about Israel yesterday.
I didn't see you yesterday. I know.
Oh, well. I'm not sure I didn't understand the last bit about who I'm writing for and who's reading it.
You're not writing for the
Middle America.
Oh, Middle America. Okay, I got it. Well, very basic first line here is, I write what I can, I put it out there. I can't force horses to go to the oasis to drink, I mean, it's there for people. I can only say, don't tell me you didn't know or the information wasn't there for you. I don't know about, I can imagine the American press, which fortunately I don't have to read. Another advantage of not using the internet, but certainly I can tell you that the French press, as well as the British press, has been very prominent in repeatedly coming back to the issue that it was a paper produced for the hoped-for victory of a Netanyahu Likud parliamentary victory in Israel, which first promoted the idea of having a war against Saddam. And we know those members of the administration who were, or the present administration or the previous one, who were involved in drawing up that paper and who they were. And most of them clearly were supporters, active supporters of Israel, if not actually, and in some cases it was the case, members of AIPAC. It is a fact. I think the idea, I think it's important to say I don't believe that the whole of American foreign policy is actually run by another country. I think that's giving far too much credit. The problem is that there has been created in America a fear of opposing Israel or criticizing Israel, and that is a fact. And it is clearly one of the reasons why so many people are so anxious not to ask the question why about 9/11, because clearly it involves the whole Middle East, including Israel and America's relationship with the Middle East. This created an environment from which these creatures came on 9/11 and stretched out across the Atlantic and arrived not very many thousand meters from where we're sitting. And I don't think we can avoid that. The real problem is we've got a very good example on the whole issue of the PBS program. Okay, well, you've broken the panel probably, but I was reading this morning of a small college in, I think, New York State, where two Palestinians were to be invited to speak to students, and afterwards two Israelis were going to come, and those family members of parents of students who supported Israel managed to effectively have that forum stopped. Unless we had one Israeli and one Palestinian, the usual story. And then, of course, the whole ream of calumny against one of the Palestinian speakers who was said to be anti-Semitic, although there's no evidence he was, etc., etc., etc. The Rachel Corrie thing is an astonishing example of how a small group of people can effectively bring a major, at least in terms of prestige, a prestigious theatre company to its knees. My belief is you only need to say, I refuse, once and go ahead with that play, and a lot of the problems will be solved. But you must do it. And that the organisers of your theatre company didn't do that. In Britain, that would never be allowed. That a theatre company, we did show it in Britain, but with even those pressures, it wouldn't go through. I mean, one of the problems, I'll give you a classic example of lobby pressures, and that is that when my first reports came out after 9/11, on the question why and what did this represent, etc. The letters that arrived at my newspaper in London were the classic campaign letters, all with the same verbs, the same structural sentences, and the intention, of course, was to have the editorial board of my paper, the editor, say, well, my goodness me, we've got a big problem here, maybe we should tone down Bob. And of course, our reaction to such campaign postcards is to get them all and put them in a big bin, because it's a campaign, it's a political campaign, they're not ordinary readers. There was one guy actually wrote in from Texas saying, I will never read your magazine again. Well, we're not a magazine, and alas, we don't circulate in Texas. But, there is the problem. You've got to actually face up to these things, and I don't think that the structure of the whole society, cultural society in America at the moment is capable of doing that. I don't think it... I was amazed to read about the whole Rachel Corrie episode here. Here's an American woman, for goodness sake, who was killed. American woman. One of your people. And you can't stage, effectively a theatrical tribute to her life, which is what this play is. I've got a copy of it. I've read it. I haven't seen it, of course, because I live in Beirut, and it'll be a long time before it reaches Beirut. But... but I think, it's got to be... One of the big problems that I think you do have in the United States, and it popped up actually last night when people were buying and getting me to sign my book, is that every so often real anti-Semites, real racists, wish to jump on the bandwagon of someone who is perfectly bravely and correctly trying to say, I am not an anti-Semite, I have the right to criticize Israel. We had one man came up last night, I don't think I see him here today, who kept saying, what have you said about David Irving? And I got the impression he was a supporter of David Irving. And I didn't like the way his questions were asked. I know Norman Finkelstein has told me sometimes people come up to him and think that he is an anti-Semite, and they feel the same way. So there are dangers, there are enemies out there, enemies of Israelis, enemies of members of the Jewish community who are our enemies too, because we must be against anti-Semitism. And there's a big danger there of people... A perfect example of this is the way in which the New York Times wants to bring in David Dukes and the Ku Klux Klan, and his comments on the famous London Review of Books article by the two American professors at Harvard on the Israeli lobby. And the fact that David Dukes is brought in as sort of the kind of person who'd be on their side. You see, and there's this detachment you've immediately got to have. I'm planning a big piece on the Israeli lobby in my paper next week, partly around this whole issue. I love banging on AIPAC's door and saying good morning, and they always love to see me.
I mean, there's no question that the Israeli lobby has an influence on U.S. foreign policy, but it's not the decisive factor. That decisive factor was clearly stipulated in a 1945 State Department document, which has been declassified. You can get it. 3 years before the founding of the State of Israel. The Middle East constitutes the greatest strategic resource in the history of the world, the greatest material prize in the history of the world. That's a direct quote. And we intend to get it. So that's what that's the main player here. It's about ExxonMobil and Chevron Texaco. Israel is a factor, but it's about U.S. domination of oil and control of that commodity.
Yes, sir.
Do you think they're going to succeed in at least controlling the oil?
David, I'm sure.
Are they going to succeed in controlling the oil?
At $67 a barrel. You want to control that oil?
Only if we go along with it. I mean, I think, we have to be very vigilant right now, because this is a kind of out-of-control wrecking crew that's in the White House, taking their cues from someone who's in a coma. I'm speaking of the man of peace, Ariel Sharon, the general who invaded Lebanon. He told Bush the day after Iraq is crushed, you go after Iran. And right now you're seeing the same propaganda being replayed just as it was with Iraq. A growing threat, a menace, we have to do something about it. Iran is a danger to the national security of the United States. Are we going to fall for this again? Are we a nation of sheep? Yes?
Okay,
sheep and morons?
I have two people in the front here. First, a woman in the purple.
Fool
and then
me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you.
Yes.
My question pertains to denial of Armenian genocide and freedom of press and freedom
to rebut. Well, my dear, this is journalism. We have to express.
Did you get it in print? Did you?
This is face-to-face.
Oh. I'll give you an example. Can I have a quick one on Canada here? The Toronto Globe and Mail reprinted an article I wrote on the Armenian genocide and deleted the word genocide and put tragedy. So I saw this in a Canadian reader immediately called me up in Beirut and gave me the date of the publication. So I called our syndication people in London and told them to get onto the Toronto Globe and Mail immediately, because our syndication rules are you can reprint and you pay for it, but you can't change it. It turned out that their reply was as follows. The change was made by an editor who has since left the paper. And anyway, we didn't buy the article. They stole it. Sorry, David. A light-hearted bit there for you.
I think we have to be, diligent, vigilant, persistent, and demand that we have justice on this issue. It's, I was in Beirut last year during the 90th anniversary celebrations, and, talking in Syria as well, and Aleppo and Damascus. And, the perspective there, of course, is quite different from here. People are more militant there. They're much more aggressive on this issue than, let's say, our North American Armenian brothers and sisters.
No, I was going to say on the subject of the whole Armenian genocide and recognition of the denials, and make a connection also with what I have said to Jewish audiences in Britain. And that is that I think it's sometimes essential to draw away a bit from the ethnic origin of the victims. I've said in Britain several times, in forums just like this, that the Jewish Holocaust was that most evil of acts, not because the victims were Jews, but because they were human beings just like you and me. And that the Armenian Holocaust, which is what we call it in The Independent, and I'm surprised you didn't, because Winston Churchill called it a Holocaust, and I can give you the exact detail on the page in the book. I think it's important to stress to people, when you're trying to prevent the deniers, that this denial of the Armenian genocide is not wicked because the victims were Armenians, but because they were human beings just like you and me.
Yes, ma'am.
The West insisted that there be a free election in the Palestinian areas. And they agreed that it was free and independent. And Hamas won.
Those pesky Palestinians elected the wrong people. That's right, yeah.
They're building their wall, and they're building major settlements. They're cutting off water to the Palestinians, and they have cut off their rightful money that they have gotten from the Palestinians, and the West is also cutting off money. So what is the prognosis for the Palestinians?
Well, they elected the wrong people, just like the Lebanese elected too many Hezbollah MPs, just like the Iraqis elected a government which is quite partial towards Iran. We can't make the Middle East understand that democracy is something they should have, providing they vote our side in the democracy. I'm sorry to be so cynical towards you, but I have to report it at first hand. I think eventually, if Hamas don't make too many mistakes, and they're perfectly capable of it, I think we will release those funds. We'll have to, because the suffering it will cause not to do so will be too great. But I repeat what I've said before. The Israelis, despite all the talk of not talking to terrorists, do maintain contacts with Hamas. And I recall not many hours ago in public how when the Hamas representatives were thrown out of Israel to the border of Marj al-Zuhur in Lebanon, back in 1992-93, I was going and interviewing them quite often. And one day when I was down in South Lebanon, I said to the Hamas people, well, actually, I'm going to Israel tomorrow. And as I was leaving, one of the Hamas officials ran down the side of the hill towards me and said, listen, shall I give you Shimon Peres's home number? And it was Shimon Peres's home number, because the Hamas people had always had a relationship with Israeli officials. After the Oslo Agreement, after the famous handshake on the White House lawn, when Arafat appeared to be blocking some initiative of the Israelis, or objecting to some non-withdrawal on time, Israeli military officials went and spoke to the Hamas leadership in the West Bank. I was amazed. I was in Jerusalem. Next day it was on the front page of the Jerusalem Post. But that again has been sort of deleted from the narrative. We do talk to Hamas, and the Israelis talk to Hamas, and Hamas talks to the Israelis. But the narrative for us journalists is to have a much simpler story, like there's going to be civil war in Iraq, so Hamas is being totally cut off. I think it's not as bad as you think, although it's bad enough. But yes, overall, could we demonstrate our hypocrisy towards the Arab world more than by demanding, as Bush did, a fresh leadership for the Palestinians and real elections? He got them, and he doesn't like the result. And this is what happened in Algeria in 1990, and we had 150,000 people die in the next 10 years because the Islamists weren't allowed to take the genuine electoral victory which they won in the primary round of elections in 1990 in Algeria. And look what happened. We've still got an FLN military government in Algeria that's saying, oh, we're going to have amnesty for all sides, which means the police get away with it again.
But there's a whole history of the United States denying democracy while affirming it. You know, you only have to go back to Iran in 1953, democratically elected government. The year after that, Jacobo Arbenz, democratically elected. Allende in Chile, Chavez in Venezuela, on and on and on. And then just look at the satraps like Mubarak in Egypt, who's now the second longest ruler since Ramses II, and Egyptian woman, it's true, by the way, an Egyptian woman told me yesterday the election that was just held there was like a movie, a bad movie, where the Egyptians were extras on the set. They were given sandwiches by the Mubarak people to vote for him. So we don't have any problems with that. Again, the hypocrisy here is breathtaking. If we had a democratic media, and I'm not just talking about alternative radio or The Independent or The Guardian or Free Speech TV and Deep Dish TV and Democracy Now!, but a larger independent media, all this information would be on the edge of your fingertips, just like you know how many home runs Reggie Jackson hit in 1977, or the Mets got Carlos Delgado to team up with Carlos Beltran, and they might win the National League this year and break the 14-year reign of the Atlanta Braves. You know all that stuff. Why can't we know about these other things, which are life and death issues?
Let's take another question from the front, and then we'll move to the other parts of the room. Yes, ma'am.
Someone to comment on the fact that people live here with Armenians with conscience.
Sorry, Armenians?
Armenians with conscience about what's
Yeah.
Every year when there's a commemoration of the genocide, I've gone in a few years, and it's always like Charles Schumer, Curtis Lewa, and I got a flyer yesterday. I was at the event, and I saw at the bottom Armenian pack. So I was doing APAC, Armenian pack. You feel that Armenians should try to work within our organizations, or I go to many things outside of our organization.
I don't think I'm the right person to answer this question, actually. Maybe David is.
Well, I think we should try and find common ground with as many disparate groups and communities as possible. Latino, African American, Native American, Jewish American, on a variety of issues, and find those areas where we can work together. I don't like if I can speak for a moment as an Armenian, I don't like the tribalism aspect of our people. I don't find that. I know, I'm sorry. No, in a sense, it has held us together, the resilience of the tribe, but it's also very limiting. I mean, I've always felt suffocating, this feeling of asphyxiation around Armenians or the Armenian community, because it was this tunnel vision on this one topic, which is not to, diss the topic. It's very important that we have justice on this issue. But there are other things. There are other, galaxies to explore.
I'd like to say also that, while every situation has its unique features and we should be aware of them, we have to also form alliances with other people to fight together. And my political history personally comes out of the U.S. Civil Rights Movement. And